Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Coming up is our conversation with Julia Azari, but we do have a breaker here with what's going on in the political world of Eric Adams. Just breaking on the terminal a short time ago, as you might have heard, the judge permanently ending corruption case against the mayor of New York. A federal judge dismissed the charges against Eric Adams, bringing what is a permanent end to the case. There was a bit of an argument about whether charges should be refiled, and we have a chance to catch up quickly on this breaker with June Grasso, host of Bloomberg Law. She's with us from World Headquarters in New York. June, what's this all about? Is this case over or not?
Case is over. The government got what it wanted in one respect, but not in the other, because the judge slammed the government over and over and over again in his decision. The government wanted to be able to bring charges against Eric Adams in the future, and the judge said, no, I'm going to dismiss this with prejudice, meaning you can't bring that again. He said it wasn't right to have leverage over the mayor of New York. But the judge also characterized this agreement as everything here smacks of a bargain, dismissal of the indictment in exchange for immigration policy concessions. And he just took down each of the Justice Department's arguments for why they wanted to dismiss the case. For example, it was brought for political reasons. He said, no, zero evidence that it was brought for political reasons. Another reason, the mayor, if he has to litigate this case, won't be able to deal with the immigration policy concerns. He said, no. Again, he said the mayor dealt with immigration policy concerns right after this by letting ICE into Rikers, which the judge said may not be in compliance with New York's law. So he had a lot to say, though he had really no choice but to dismiss the case.
With this now less than 3 months before the primary election in the New York City mayoral race, He can still run then, right? He's a candidate.
Absolutely. And his lawyer had written yesterday asking the judge to hand down a decision quickly because of the deadlines coming up in that race. The judge also mentioned, however, whenever something is dismissed in this case or something happens, Eric Adams or his lawyers come out and say, this shows that Mayor Adams is innocent of all charges. The judge said, this is not an indication of guilt or innocence. I'm not ruling based on that. And I think he did that deliberately because he knew that we're going to hear choruses from the Adams camp that this means that he was innocent or not guilty of those charges. But yeah, he's going to run, and we'll see how much this plays in. As you know, he already has horrible approval ratings in New York City. So we'll see how much this plays in and his tie to the Trump administration.
Well, pretty neat bow to put on this one. June Grasso, thank you so much. Bloomberg Law with much more to follow this evening. A federal judge dismissing corruption charges against Eric Adams. There you go. Nice and clean. June, thank you very much. There's nothing more dangerous than when a journalist is looking for a trend story, and that is exactly what I am going to do right now with the analysis this morning coming out of Wisconsin and Florida. Hey, first great day of the year for Democrats is the headline in the tip sheets this morning. Add Cory Booker at 25 hours on the Senate floor, and it's a brand new day. I may be going a little far, but what happened last evening in Florida, of course, by the way, Republicans won, but not by nearly as much as would have been expected. Certainly that 6th district of Florida, the Mike Waltz seat we talked about, a Trump win of 30-plus points. Didn't turn out quite like that for the Republican candidate, but those seats are preserved. Democrats may be claiming a moral victory. We're going to point more to what happened last evening in Wisconsin, the Democratic win, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, the one that Elon Musk invested tens of millions of dollars in, making it the most expensive judicial battle in American history. Went to the Democrat last evening. A 10-point spread. Judge Susan Crawford handily beat Judge Brad Schimmel in her victory speech last night. Listen.
Today, Wisconsinites fended off an unprecedented attack on our democracy, and Wisconsins stood up and said loudly that justice does not have a price. Our courts are not for sale.
I don't know if Julia Azari will indulge me on my trend story, but that's why we turn to an expert. Professor of Political Science, Marquette University. Julia, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg, and good to see you. Am I onto something here, or are we making way too much about a couple of statewide races less than 100 days into the Trump administration?
Well, I have kind of complicated thoughts about that. And I want to echo what you had said about kind of the significance of this race in Wisconsin. As someone who lives in Wisconsin, this morning, I have to admit, was a little lonely because by 10 a.m. I didn't have 15 text messages telling me to vote. It's been a very intense period here in Wisconsin, and it's also been, I can attest, very nationalized and with a lot of emphasis on the race really being about Elon Musk and Donald Trump, not so much about state level judicial issues. As far as thinking about a trend, here's how I would think about it. We often see this happen in the special elections that unfold over the course of an odd year after a presidential election. We often see the president's party lose, and that, or whatever we want to call this with the judicial election, technically nonpartisan, it's clear what the sides were. We often see that. We often see, and that sort of foreshadows the midterm losses that we often see for the president's party. But what I want to emphasize from my perspective as someone who studies this is that it's not as automatic as I think the trend would have us believe. And what it actually reflects is political mobilization and organization. And the way I would think about this and what I would look for is how much do some of these results reflect that organization and mobilization on the ground. And certainly you would see that in Wisconsin. And so that would be the lens I would also turn to some of these other races where Republicans underperformed their usual electoral returns. Was that the result of kind of voters experiencing some kind of remorse or voters responding to an administration? Was it also the result of real organization on the ground, mobilizing some voters and not others, and emphasizing bringing national issues into that conversation?
What does this say about Elon Musk? Because he not only made this the most expensive judicial race in U.S. history, he said a lot. He was out there with the cheese head. We all saw this, giving out $1 million checks. He said this race would decide the future of America and Western civilization. Why was he so keyed into Wisconsin?
Right. I mean, I think, who knows? But it's not wrong that this is a state where a lot of things end up kind of being decided, where this is a key swing state. We have a number of judicial issues that could come before the court, including the legislative maps and also a trigger abortion law from 1849. So, these are really forefront issues. I think even before the 2024 election, even before this race and Elon Musk, certainly it was important to look at what was going on in Wisconsin to understand national trends. As far as Musk, one thing that I like to say after these off-year elections is that they often kind of tell us stories that we already know. And the story that we already know is that Elon Musk isn't very popular. That and particularly like billionaires are not very popular. I have all sorts of survey data that attests to this. People are not crazy about the power of the wealthy. Sorry if this is the wrong venue for that comment. But Musk, you asked me to share my expert opinion, and I'm looking at these open-ended survey responses unbidden. People often talk about wealth and billionaires, and Musk didn't.
I work for the radio
network,
hide
that,
Julia.
Right?
There's no billionaires around here you have to worry about. It's just us.
Okay, good. I'm safe with my fellow media content creators, but
you are.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. Is this isn't really popular. Wisconsinites are a little bit difficult to read politically. It's very much a purple state. It has potentially sort of shifted from being a state that's purple because there are a lot of independent swing voters to a state that's purple because there are a lot of passionate partisans, and so every election is a question of which ones will show up. But whatever it is a state with a strong sort of populist history and populist background. And so it's not surprising to me that the idea that someone would come in from out of the state and kind of flaunt their wealth as a means of political power would not go over that well.
Mm-hmm. You probably heard the story or read the story of Politico magazine, Donald Trump telling his inner circle that Elon's going to be wrapping up soon, packing up his toys and stepping back in the coming weeks from his current role as a governing partner. Is Donald Trump getting a sense of what you're feeling, or will they say his work is done, or both?
Yeah, good question. We'll find out over the next couple of months. It's not terribly unusual to have some staff turnover in response to these sorts of, in response to a political development or in response to a policy development. And Musk's role is very strange. He occupies a kind of mentally, I think, the role that we often attribute to a chief of staff, but he's not playing that role at all. He is not managing the Trump White House. They won't be totally straightforward about what he's doing, but clearly he's deeply involved in the sort of policy impact of cutting government. And I think that if there's a sense that that's unpopular, part of Musk's strange role is that it makes him pretty easy to get rid of. He's not Senate confirmed. He's not even really in a clear and official role. So I think there was always maybe a sense that he would be the fall guy.
You should come by more often, Julia Azari. I was excited to hear you were coming on, and great to see you. Professor of Political Science, Marquette University, as part of our conversation today on Bloomberg. I still wonder, where does Elon Musk live in town? Did he get a property? Does he have an apartment? Is renting a house, or is he parked at a hotel? Maybe he really is sleeping in the office every night. I guess he can do that for 130 days. Look, we've got a lot more to talk about here, and we'll assemble our panel coming up next.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Just over 3.5 hours to go. And no news, 2.5 hours.
Yes.
Math can be difficult sometimes. 2.5 hours to go. We still have not heard from the White House any kind of preview as to what exactly it is the president will be announcing at 4 p.m. Eastern time. But we have heard from the White House, at least via the press secretary, that something that was reported in Politico earlier is apparently, and this is quoting Caroline Leavitt here, garbage. It was a report that the president has told members of his inner circle, including members of his cabinet, that Elon Musk will be leaving his forward-facing role as a special government employee at the Department of Government Efficiency, or working with it fairly soon. Now, whether or not the accuracy of the story is in question here, this is Politico reporting. We can't speak to that, Joe, but it is interesting that the timing of it coincides with what was a loss for Elon Musk yesterday after an investment not just of his own financial capital to the tune of $20 million, but also a good amount of his political capital went in to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. He was backing the conservative candidate who ultimately lost by 10 points to the liberal candidate, Susan Crawford.
Today, Wisconsinites fended off an unprecedented attack on our democracy, and Wisconsins stood up and said loudly that justice does not have a price. Our courts are not for sale.
That's where we start with our political panel today. Jeannie Shanzano, our Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, joined today by Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, Blue Stack Strategies. Great to see you both, and welcome. Jeannie, what does this mean for Democrats? Are people going a little far here? We're hearing this was the first good day for Democrats since the election of Donald Trump, and that may not be saying a lot, to be perfectly honest, as we look back over the past couple of months here. But these couple of statewide races, Wisconsin Supreme Court and the couple of seats that we saw actually stay Republican in Florida, mean what for Democrats?
Yeah, there is always a tendency to overread, but Joe, we have to give Democrats something. They've had a crappy few months, so they're out celebrating. And of course, Cory Booker last night, over 24 hours, helped buoy their spirits. So yeah, this was a big win in Wisconsin. It was also a necessary win. If Democrats had lost Wisconsin, that would have been catastrophic for them. Likewise, and I think Maura would agree, had Republicans lost those Florida seats, that would have been catastrophic for the GOP. So in some ways, this sort of reinforced the status quo. But there was something about the Florida wins. They were able to get those margins a little bit smaller than they were in 24, or a lot smaller. And they also carried Escambia County, and that was a big upset for the GOP. So there were some bright spots there for Democrats. But of course, they have to be careful about overreading, because we've been down this road before.
Well, and Maura, to Jeannie's points on the margins in Florida, I see there's kind of two ways of looking at it. One being that in both districts, Republicans won by double digits. The other being that those double-digit margins were half or less of what Republicans, including Donald Trump, were able to secure in those very same districts in November. Which side do you take on that?
Well, I think you could take the fact that people just didn't go out for this vote. I mean, it's 3 months after the Republican government took over, and we don't always see a large turnout when it comes to these off elections. And so I think with the economy not being great, people just didn't feel compelled to show up. It doesn't mean they went out and voted for the Democrat. It just means they didn't show up as strongly as they have in the past for elections, like for Donald Trump or for Mike Waltz, or, it was held by Cliff Stearns for years, and he would have somewhere up to 70+% of the vote back when he was the member. So this is a very stronghold Republican district that wasn't a surprise. I agree with Jeannie's point about Democrats looking for victory somewhere, looking to take some bright spots here because they've had pretty bad days leading up until now. So they're looking at this as, okay, we have something to grasp onto and hopefully can use this towards, the elections in November with Virginia and New Jersey.
The money trail is pretty impressive, though, when you look at the way Democrats used money in all three races, Jeannie, outraising the Republican 3-1 in Florida's first district, outraising the Republican 10-1 in Florida's sixth, and Wisconsin nearly 2-1, making it the most expensive judicial battle in U.S. history. How much of all of this was just about money?
Yeah, and what's insane about that is that you see there the people who raised the most money also lost. And so it says what we know about American politics. And Donald Trump has said this over and over. Money is important, but it doesn't guarantee you a victory, as I'm sure Elon Musk would attest to today. And likewise, the Democrats who raised big money in Florida. And of course, we didn't expect them to win. But one thing I think Democrats have to be very cautious about, and you just mentioned before the set up the Politico piece, Democrats have to be cautious about running against Elon Musk, because as Politico notes, Donald Trump could exit him off stage. And then what do Democrats run against in the midterm election? They have to keep their eye on the person in charge. This is Donald Trump's government. This is the GOP's government. It is not Elon Musk's. He's working at the behest of the president. And so Democrats have to focus like a laser beam on Donald Trump. And this announcement today at 4:00 is a big part of what they need to focus on, the economy.
Well, what about the way Republicans should be viewing Elon Musk now, Maura? Because we have seen evidence in the last several months of Republicans deciding to vote a different way, potentially change their behavior due to the threat of primary challenges being funded by Elon Musk. Is Wisconsin yesterday a lesson that even if Elon Musk throws his money at something, it's not necessarily something that you actually have to worry about? Or does his massive financial war chest, the largest, of course, of anyone in terms of wealth in the world, still mean you have to keep him on side?
I do think you're seeing that, especially in the Senate. They have a little more wiggle room, right? They have 6-year terms. And we saw, Rand Paul is standing with Tim Kaine on this, bill against tariffs for Canada. A couple others have joined them, and they're not as threatened by Elon Musk's threat, his I'm going to be involved in all the primaries. With the Doge thing and him leaving the White House, it was set when Doge was established and when it was announced that back when it was he and Vivek Ramaswamy, it was going to be dissolved on July 4th, 2026, America's 250th birthday. So it was already set, kind of in stone that this would be dissolved by then. And that's ahead of the midterm elections. And so to Jeannie's point, the Democrats do need a new strategy. It can't be just targeting or just standing anti-Trump or anti-Elon. And I think what Republicans will do is continue to focus on the people. And those are who they're going to be hearing from when these tariffs come into place, because they're going to have to see whether their constituents are willing to play the long game and trust in Donald Trump's plan, because the short-term pains, especially on farmers and especially on those who are already hurting to afford groceries, how long can they hold on for, and how long can those members keep their seats is to be said.
It's kind of interesting, Jeannie and Maura. We really haven't seen Elon Musk since Wisconsin, have we? Since he donned the cheese head and gave out the $1 million checks. Would it be smart, Maura, for Donald Trump to not have Elon Musk standing next to him in the Rose Garden today?
It would be smart for him for Elon to maybe take a step back and to focus on the task at hand. which was supposed to be giving out guidance and assessing where our fraud, waste, and abuse is, I think that the excessive role he has played thus far isn't necessarily a net benefit to Republicans, and I'm sure the president and the White House have been hearing as much. So again, Donald Trump talks about how Elon has this big job and he's doing this out of his own goodwill. Well, then, it does cause you to wonder, should he go back to that big job that he has and let those who are elected do the job that the people who elected them to do, ask them to do. So that's where I think his focus needs to be, is on what the people who voted for him asked him to do in terms of the economy and safety and security.
Well, when we consider what they asked of the economy, obviously, Jeannie, it was in part that they wanted to see prices come down. Most economists would argue the tariffs he is going to announce today, at the very least, threaten to bring those prices up. Even if it's not Elon Musk standing beside him, does Donald Trump need to kind of allow the blame for tariffs should things not work out in the opportune fashion the administration is hoping it will, be cast elsewhere, not just as him as president alone?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But, who else is there to blame? We are already hearing that Howard Lutnick may take some blame if this doesn't all work out the way Donald Trump intends. The reality is Donald Trump owns this start to finish, and Democrats have to focus on him. He is the one who put Elon Musk in charge of Doge. He is the one who put Howard Lutnick in commerce and all of these folks. And he is the one who's deeply committed, apparently, to tariffs. And the reality is his eye is off the ball. What people elected him to do was to bring prices down and grow their incomes. All of this craziness about tariffs on and off and on and off that have undermined the market, reduced confidence of businesses and consumers, isn't helping him. And he is doing what presidential candidates and then new presidents often do, overread their election victory. He's got to focus on what people brought him there to do. And we'll see today whether he does that or not. By the way, Kaylee, I forgot to say happy Liberation Day.
Oh, wow. That was nice.
And Joe, too,
Yeah,
not just
Jeannie.
Kaylee.
Well, I appreciate
sorry,
that very
Joe.
much.
And Maura as well.
Yeah, no, all the way around, I feel
And
like.
Maura.
Thank you, Jeannie. That's very kind.
Jeannie Shanzana, Maura Gillespie, our political panel on this Liberation Day. At least that's what President Trump is calling it.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Donald Trump not only talking tariffs today, though, at the White House. Kaylee, he's talking TikTok. Charlie Pellet just put his finger on it.
Yep.
By the way, this is before we got the breaker, the headline about Amazon, which Bloomberg is now reporting. There was a meeting to consider a proposal for taking over TikTok by Oracle, Blackstone, and a couple of other investors. This just got more complicated because now Amazon apparently is going to drop a bid.
Yeah, although the president has been saying there were multiple bidders interested in TikTok, but we have a lot of lingering questions. One being which bid is seen as most attractive at this point. The other being, will that include the algorithm or will that actually be left to Chinese control? Of course, that was one of the main concerns of the bipartisan legislation that passed that would see TikTok banned or divested to begin with.
Yes, if you're not buying the algorithm, though, are you really buying TikTok?
Well, maybe we should ask this question to Mike Shepard, who, of course, leads our coverage of technology and strategic industries here at Bloomberg. So obviously, Mike, there seem to be a number of players in the game. Our reporting indicates that Amazon's bid is not being taken that seriously. Why would it be? And if it's not Amazon's, who is?
Well, it's a great question. And we're hoping to get a little bit more clarity from this out of the White House this afternoon. It's a full court press trying to figure out what is going on. But Amazon has a reputation for kicking tires on different companies and weighing a bid and then pulling away. And it did come a little bit later in the game compared to, say, some of the others that we've seen. Even Mr. Beast has thrown his hat in the ring with, and then we also have Frank McCourt, who was interviewed by our colleague Caroline Hyde earlier today on Bloomberg Television, talking about his bid from Project Liberty. And they, interestingly, don't intend to buy TikTok with the algorithm. They are content to leave it in Chinese hands and then try to construct it on their own. And he says they have a way to do that. They have a price that they're willing to pay for TikTok without the algorithm. But I think you raised a good question. Why would you want this app without this influential recommendation feature that's powered it so effectively?
It's like kind of like buying Coke without the recipe, right?
That's a great way to put it, Joe, because it is sort of that secret sauce that makes it work so effectively. And yet maybe in this era of AI, there is a way to re-engineer it and perhaps do it a little bit more quickly and cost effectively too.
But would that be in keeping with the actual law, or does that matter if it's ultimately the Trump administration that is the enforcement mechanism for that law?
Well, this is one of the, it's a conundrum. There are so many layers to this story of TikTok. And a year ago at this time, we were talking about the push to see this divestiture ban legislation get through Congress. Ultimately, it did. It was attached, you'll both remember well, to the Ukraine and Israel aid package. And that kind of sped it through, and people hailed its passage, and Joe Biden signed it. And then as the time passed, and they had to actually find not only a buyer, but get ByteDance and the Chinese government to go along, that's where it became more difficult, because ByteDance has no interest in selling this valuable asset. And the Chinese government likewise doesn't either. And they would need to sign off on any divestiture involving the algorithm because it is such sensitive technology.
Thanks for popping in on this. An important development here on the way to the deadline. Mike Shepard, of course, with us in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons on this Tariff Day, I think we can call it. Yeah, they say Liberation Day at the White House, but of course, that's up for interpretation. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.